Hi, everybody. I'm back, and today I'm going to read chapter 11 of Mary Poppins. It's called Christmas Shopping. But before we do that, let's read a poem. This one is called My Dog is a Plumber. My dog is a plumber. He must be a boy, although I must tell you his favorite toy is a little play stove with pans and with pots, which he really must like because he plays with it lots. So perhaps he's a girl, which kind of makes sense since he can't throw a ball and he can't climb a fence. But neither can Dad, and I know he's a man, and Mom is a woman, and she drives a van. Maybe the problem is in trying to tell just what someone is by what he does well. And here's the picture. All right, let's read Mary Poppins. Christmas shopping. I smell snow, said Jane as they got out of the bus. I smell Christmas trees, said Michael. I smell fried fish, said Mary Poppins. And then there was no time to smell anything else, for the bus had stopped outside the largest shop in the world, and they were all going into it to do their Christmas shopping. May we look at the windows first, said Michael, hopping excitedly on one leg. I don't mind, said Mary Poppins with surprising mildness. Not that Jane and Michael were really very surprised, for they knew that the thing Mary Poppins liked doing best of all was looking in shop windows. They knew, too, that while they saw toys and books and holly boughs and plum cakes, Mary Poppins saw nothing but herself reflected there. Look, airplanes, said Michael, as they stopped before a window in which toy airplanes were careening through the air on wires. And look there, said Jane, 2 tiny babies in one cradle. Do you think they're china? Just look at you, said Mary Poppins to herself, particularly noticing how nice her new gloves were with the fur tops. They were the first pair she had ever had, and she thought that she would never grow tired of looking at them in shop windows with her hands inside them. And having examined the reflection of the gloves, she went carefully over her whole person, coat, hat, scarf, and shoes, with herself inside. And she thought that, on the whole, she had never seen anybody looking quite so smart and distinguished. But the winter afternoons, she knew, were short, and they had to be home by tea time. So with a sigh, she wrenched herself away from her glorious reflection. Now we will go in, she said, and annoyed Jane and Michael very much by lingering at the haberdashery counter and taking great trouble over the choice of a reel of black cotton. The toy department, Michael reminded her, is in that direction. I know, thank you, don't point, she said, and paid her bill with aggravating slowness. But at last they found themselves alongside Father Christmas, who went to the greatest trouble in helping them choose their presents. That will do nicely for Daddy, said Michael, selecting a clockwork train with special signals. I will take care of it for him when he goes to the city. I think I will get this for Mother, said Jane, pushing a small doll's perambulator, which she felt sure her mother had always wanted. Perhaps she will lend it to me sometime. After that, Michael chose a packet of hairpins for each of the twins and a mechano set for his mother, a mechanical beetle for Robert's and I, a pair of spectacles for Ellen, whose eyesight was perfectly good, and some bootlaces for Mrs. Brill, who always wore slippers. Jane, after some hesitation, eventually decided that a white dicky would be just the thing for Mr. Banks, and she brought Robinson Crusoe for the twins to read when they grew up. Until they are old enough, I can read it myself, she said. I am sure they will lend it to me. Mary Poppins had a great argument with Father Christmas over a cake of soap. Why not Life Boy, said Father Christmas, trying to be helpful and looking anxiously at Mary Poppins, for she was being rather snappy. I prefer Viniolia, she said haughtily, and she bought a cake of that. My goodness, she said, smoothing the fur on her right-hand glove. I wouldn't half like a cup of tea. Would you quarter like it, though? Asked Michael. There's no call for you to be funny, said Mary Poppins, in such a voice that Michael felt that indeed there wasn't. And it's time to go home. There, She had said the very words she had been hoping that she wouldn't say. That was so like Mary Poppins. "Just 5 minutes longer," pleaded Jane. "Ah, do, Mary Poppins. You look so nice in your new gloves," said Michael wildly. But Mary Poppins, though she appreciated the remark, was not taken in by it. "No," she said, and she closed her mouth with a snap and stalked towards the doorway. "Oh dear," said Michael to himself, as he followed her, staggering under the weight of his parcels. "If only she would say yes for once." But Mary Poppins hurried on, and they had to go with her. Behind them, Father Christmas was waving his hand, and the fairy queen on the Christmas tree and all the other dolls were smiling sadly and saying, "Take me home, somebody." And the aeroplanes were all beating their wings and singing in bird-like voices, "Let me fly, oh do let me fly." Jane and Michael hurried away, closing their ears to those enchanting voices and feeling that the time in the toy department had been unreasonably and cruelly short. And then, just as they came towards the shop entrance, the adventure happened. They were just about to spin the glass door and go out when they saw, coming toward it from the pavement, the running, flickering figure of a child. "Look," said Jane and Michael, both together. "My gracious goodness, glory me!" exclaimed Mary Poppins, and stood still. And well she might, for the child had practically no clothes on, only a light, wispy strip of blue stuff that looked as though she had torn it from the sky to wrap around her naked body. It was evident that she did not know much about spinning doors, for she went around and around inside of it, pushing it so that it would spin faster and laughing as it caught her and sent her whirling around. Then suddenly, with a quick little movement, she freed herself, sprang away from it, and landed inside the shop. She paused on tiptoe, turning her head this way and that, as though she were looking for someone. Then, with a start of pleasure, she caught sight of Jane and Michael and Mary Poppins as they stood, half hidden beside an enormous fir tree, and ran towards them joyously. "Ah, there you are! Thank you for waiting. I'm afraid I'm a little late," said the child, stretching out her bright arms to Jane and Michael. Now she cocked her head to one side. "Aren't you glad to see me? Say yes, say yes." "Yes," said Jane, smiling, for nobody, she felt, could help being glad to see anyone so bright and happy. "But who are you?" she inquired curiously. "What is your name?" said Michael, gazing at her. "Who am I? What's my name? Don't say you don't know me. Oh, surely, surely." The child seemed very surprised and a little disappointed. She turned suddenly to Mary Poppins and pointed her finger. "She knows me, don't you? I'm pretty sure you know me." There was a curious look on Mary Poppins' face. Jane and Michael could see blue fires in her eyes as though they reflected the blue of the child's dress and her brightness. Does it, she whispered, "begin with an M?" The child hopped on one leg delightedly. "Of course it does. You know it. M-A-I-A. I am Maya." And she turned to Jane and Michael. "Now you recognize me, don't you? I'm the second of the Pleiades. Pleiades. Huh. I don't know how to pronounce that word. We'll have to look it up. Electra, she's the eldest, couldn't come because she's minding Merope. Merope's the baby, and the 5 of us come in between, all girls. Our mother was very disappointed at first not to have a boy, but now she doesn't mind." The child danced a few steps and burst out again in her excited little voice. "Oh, Jane, oh, Michael, I've often watched you from the sky, and now I'm actually talking to you. There's nothing about you that I don't know. Michael doesn't like having his hair brushed, and Jane has a thrush's egg in a jam jar on the mantelpiece, and your father is going bald on top. I like him. It was he who first introduced us, don't you remember? He said one evening last summer, 'Look, there are the Pleiades. I think it's Pleiades. 7 stars altogether, the smallest in the sky. But there is one of them that you can't see.' He meant Merope, of course. She's still too young to stay up all night. She's such a baby that she has to go to bed very early. Some of them up there call us the little sisters, and sometimes we're called the 7 Doves, but Orion calls us you girls and takes us hunting with him." "But what are you doing here?" demanded Michael, still very surprised. Maya laughed. "Ask Mary Poppins. I'm sure she knows." "Oh, tell us, Mary Poppins," said Jane. "Well," said Mary Poppins snappily, "I suppose you two aren't the only ones in the world that want to go shopping at Christmas." "That's it," squealed Maya delightedly. "She's quite right. I've come down to buy toys for them all. We can't get away very often, you know, because we're so busy making and storing up the spring rains. That's our special job. However, we drew lots and I won. Wasn't it lucky?" And she hugged herself happily. "Come now, come on. I can't stay very long, and you must come back and help me choose." And danced about them, running now to one and now to the other, she shepherded them back to the toy department. As they went, the crowds of shoppers stood and stared at them and dropped their parcels with astonishment. "So cold for her! Can her parents be thinking of?" said the mothers, with voices that were suddenly soft and gentle. "I mean to say," said the fathers, "it shouldn't be allowed. I must write to the Times about it." And their voices were unnaturally gruff and gritty. The shopwalkers behaved curiously, too. As the little group passed, they bowed to Maya as though she were a queen. But none of them, not Jane, nor Michael, nor Mary Poppins, nor Maya, noticed or heard anything extraordinary. They were too busy with their own extraordinary adventure. "Here we are," said Maya as she pranced into the toy department. "Now, what shall we choose?" An assistant, with a start, bowed respectfully as soon as he saw her. "I want something for each of my sisters, 6 of them. You must help me, please," said Maya, smiling at him. "Certainly, madam," said the assistant agreeably. "First, my eldest sister," said Maya. "She's very domestic. What about that little stove with the silver saucepans? Yes, and that striped broom. We are so troubled with stardust, and she will love having that to sweep with." The assistant began wrapping the things in colored paper. "Now for Take It. She likes dancing. Don't you think, Jane? A skipping rope would be just the thing for her. You'll tie them carefully, won't you?" she said to the assistant. "I have a long way to go." She fluttered on among the toys, never standing still for a moment, but walking with a light, quicksilver step as though she were still twinkling in the sky. Mary Poppins and Jane and Michael could not take their eyes off her, and she flickered from one of them to another, asking their advice. There's the next one. She's difficult, so quiet and thoughtful, and never seems to want anything. A book, do you think, Mary Poppins? What is this family, the Swiss Robinsons? I think she'd like that, and if she doesn't, she can look at the picture. Wrap it up." And she handed the book to the assistant. "I know what Celiano wants," she went on. "A hoop. She can bowl it across the sky in the daytime and make a circle of it to spin about her at night. She'll love that red and blue one." The assistant bowed again and began to wrap up the hoop. "Now there's only the 2 little ones left. Michael, what would you advise for stereope?" "What about a top?" said Michael, giving his question an earnest consideration. "A humming top? What a good idea. She will love to watch it go waltzing and singing down the sky. And what do you think for Merope, the baby, Jane?" "John and Barbara," said Jane shyly, "have rubber ducks." Maya gave a delighted squeak and hugged herself. "Oh, Jane, how wise you are. I should never have thought of that. A rubber duck for Merope, please. A blue one with yellow eyes." The assistant tied up the parcels while Maya ran around him, pushing out the paper, giving a tug to the string to make sure that it was firmly knotted. "That's right," she said. "You see, I mustn't drop anything." Michael, who had been staring steadily at her ever since she first appeared, turned and said into a loud whisper to Mary Poppins, "But she has no purse. Who will pay for the toys?" "None of your business," snapped Mary Poppins, "and it's rude to whisper." But she began to fumble busily in her pocket. "What did you say?" demanded Maya, with round, surprised eyes. "Pay? Nobody will pay. There's nothing to pay, is there?" And she turned her shining gaze upon the assistant. "Nothing at all, madam," he assured her. as he put the parcels into her arms and bowed again. I thought not. You see, she said, turning to Michael, the whole point of Christmas is that things shouldn't be given away. Is that things should be given away, isn't it? Besides, what could I pay with? We have no money up there. And she laughed at the mere suggestion of a thing. Now, we must go on, she went on, taking Michael's arm. We must all go home. It's very late, and I heard your mother telling you that you must be at home in time for tea. Besides, I must get back too. Come. And drawing Michael and Jane and Mary Poppins after her, she led the way through the shop and out the spinning door. Outside the entrance, Jane suddenly said, But there's no present for her. She's bought something for all the others and nothing for herself. Maya has no Christmas present. And she began to search hurriedly through the parcels she was carrying to see what she could spare. Mary Poppins gave a quick glance into the window beside her. She saw herself shining back at her very smart, very interesting, her hat on straight, her coat nicely pressed, and her new gloves just completing the whole effect. You be quiet, she said to Jane in her snappiest voice. At the same time, she whipped off her new gloves, thrust one of them on to each of Maya's hands. There, she said gruffly, it's cold today. You'll be glad of them. Maya looked at the gloves, hanging very large and almost empty upon her hands. She said nothing, but moving close to Mary Poppins, she reached up her spare arm and put it around Mary Poppins' neck and kissed her. A long look passed between them, and they smiled as people smile who understand each other. Maya turned then, and with her hand lightly touched the cheeks of Jane and Michael, and for a moment they all stood in a ring at the windy corner, gazing at each other as though they were enchanted. I've been so happy, said Maya softly, breaking the silence. You won't forget me, will you? They shook their heads. Goodbye, said Maya. And there's the gloves, and there's Mary Poppins and Maya giving her a hug. Goodbye, said the others, as though it were the last thing they wanted to say. And then Maya, standing poised on tiptoe, lifted up her arms and sprang into the air. She began to walk up it, step by step, climbing ever higher, as though there were invisible stairs cut into the gray sky. She waved to them as she went, and the three of them waved back. What on earth is happening? Somebody said close by. But it's not possible, said another voice. Preposterous, cried a third. For a crowd was gathering to witness the extraordinary sight of Maya returning home. A policeman rushed his way through the throng, scattering the people with his truncheon. Now, what's all this? An accident or what? He looked up, his gaze following that of the rest of the crowd. Hey, he called angrily, shaking his fist at Maya. Come down! What are you doing up there? Holding up the traffic and all? Come down. Can't have this kind of thing. Not in a public place. It isn't natural. Far away they heard Maya laughing and saw something bright dangling from her arm. It was the skipping rope. After all, the parcel had come undone. For a moment longer they saw her prancing up in the airy stair, and then a bank of clouds hid her from the eyes. They knew she was behind it, though, because of the brightness that shone about its thick, dark edge. Well, I never, said the policeman, staring upwards and scratching his head under his helmet. And well you might be, said Mary Poppins, with such a ferocious snap that anyone else might have thought she was really cross with the policeman. But Jane and Michael were not taken in by the snap, for they could see in Mary Poppins' eyes something that, if she were anybody else but Mary Poppins, might have been described as tears. Could we have imagined it? Said Michael when they got home and told the story to their mother. Perhaps, said Mrs. Banks. We imagine strange and lovely things, my darling. But what about Mary Poppins' gloves? Said Jane. We saw her give them away, and she's not wearing them now, so it must be true. What, Mary Poppins? Exclaimed Mrs. Banks. Your best fur-topped gloves? You gave them away? Mary Poppins sniffed. My gloves are my gloves, and I do what I like with them, she said haughtily. And then she straightened her hat and went down to the kitchen to have her tea. The end. Tomorrow's chapter is chapter 12, and it is called West Wind, and it is the last chapter of our book. So I hope that you'll join me. Oh, not tomorrow. It will be Monday. So I hope that you'll join me on Monday. You can be thinking about what kind of snack would be good to have for Mary Poppins. I think tea. I think I'm going to have some tea. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.